The absent old lady. Those were the first words I saw when I arrived at my granddaughter's wedding, printed neatly on a white name tag that someone had carefully placed at the reception desk. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, convinced I had misread it. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I am 69 years old. I raised a son, buried a husband, worked for more than 40 years, and spent most of my life putting my family before myself. Yet somehow, on the most important day of my granddaughter Olivia's life, the title they had chosen for me was the absent old lady. I picked up the card slowly. The young woman behind the registration table smiled nervously. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" she asked. I forced a smile and nodded. "I'm sure it's fine," I said. My voice sounded calm, but something cold had already settled deep inside my chest. The wedding was being held at a beautiful country club outside Charleston, South Carolina. The building overlooked rolling green lawns and a small lake that reflected the late afternoon sunlight. White roses lined the entrance. Crystal chandeliers sparkled through the tall windows. Everywhere I looked, there was evidence of careful planning and expensive taste. Olivia had always dreamed of a wedding like this. A wedding that looked like it belonged on the cover of a bridal magazine. I should know. I helped pay for most of it. I slipped the name tag into my purse and walked inside. The ceremony had not started yet. Guests were gathering in small groups, holding glasses of lemonade and chatting near the garden terrace. Several people smiled at me. A few gave me strange looks. At first I assumed I was imagining things. Then I noticed their eyes drifting toward the name tag clipped to my jacket. One woman looked embarrassed. Another quickly looked away. A man I had never met frowned as if he felt sorry for me. That was when I realized something. The name tag was not a mistake. Multiple people had already seen it. Somehow, they knew about it before I did. I continued walking through the reception hall, pretending not to notice. Years of life teach you many things. One of them is how to remain composed when your heart is breaking. Across the room, I spotted Olivia. She looked beautiful in her wedding gown. Her blonde hair was pinned elegantly beneath a delicate veil. Guests surrounded her, complimenting her dress and taking photographs. For a moment, I remembered the little girl who used to sit on my kitchen counter eating chocolate chip cookies while telling me about her dreams. The little girl who once cried because she was afraid nobody would come to her 10th birthday party. The little girl who promised she would always love her grandmother. She caught sight of me and waved. "Grandma," she called cheerfully. Her smile seemed perfectly natural, perfectly rehearsed. I smiled back. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I said when I reached her. "Thank you," she replied, hugging me lightly. "I'm so glad you made it." Such a strange thing to say. As if there had ever been a chance I wouldn't come. As if I hadn't helped make this entire day possible. Then her attention immediately shifted back to her friends. I stepped aside and watched her laugh with a group of bridesmaids. Not once did she mention the name tag. Not once did she seem surprised by it. Not once did she ask who had done it. That was the moment I knew. Whoever created that tag had expected me to see it. And Olivia knew exactly what it said. I found my assigned table near the far corner of the ballroom. It was so distant from the bridal party that I could barely see the head table. My seat was between two distant relatives I had never met. Not beside my son. Not beside my family. Not even near them. I sat down quietly and folded my hands in my lap. Around me, conversations filled the room. Glasses clinked. Music drifted softly from hidden speakers. Everyone seemed happy. Everyone except me. Then I noticed something lying beneath my place setting. A folded piece of paper. At first I thought it was part of the menu. Instead, it was a seating chart. Someone had circled my name in red ink. Beside it, a short handwritten note appeared in careful cursive letters. 3 simple words. "Keep her away." I stared at the note as the sounds of the ballroom faded into the background. Suddenly, the name tag felt like only the beginning. I slipped the note back beneath the plate exactly where I had found it and looked around the ballroom as if nothing had happened. Nobody was watching me directly, yet I could feel the weight of invisible eyes everywhere. The room was beautiful in the way expensive places often are. Fresh flowers stood in towering arrangements near the dance floor. Soft golden light reflected from crystal chandeliers overhead. Servers moved quietly between tables carrying trays of sparkling drinks. Everything looked perfect. That was what made the note feel even more unsettling. Someone had gone to the trouble of humiliating me while surrounding the insult with elegance. I folded my hands and forced myself to breathe slowly. Over the years, I had learned that reacting too quickly rarely revealed the truth. Silence did. Silence made people careless. A few minutes later, my son Daniel finally appeared. He was wearing a dark navy suit and looked older than I remembered. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper. For a brief moment, I felt relieved to see him. Then I noticed he did not come to my table immediately. Instead, he stopped near the bar and exchanged a few words with Olivia and his wife Vanessa. All three glanced in my direction. The conversation lasted only seconds, but something about it felt rehearsed. When Daniel eventually approached, he smiled. It was the kind of smile people wear when they're trying to avoid an uncomfortable subject. "Mom," he said, "you made it." I almost laughed at the choice of words. Of course I had made it. I lived less than 20 miles away. I would not have missed Olivia's wedding, I replied. He nodded quickly. Good, good. Then silence settled between us. He asked nothing about my table. Nothing about the strange placement card. Nothing about the name tag. It was as if those things did not exist. After another minute, he excused himself and disappeared back into the crowd. I watched him leave and felt a familiar sadness. There had been a time when Daniel told me everything. After my husband Richard passed away 12 years earlier, Daniel and I had become even closer. At least I thought we had. Then life happened. Careers, marriages, new priorities. Little by little, conversations became shorter. Visits became less frequent. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being part of the center of the family and became someone invited to observe it from the outside. A burst of laughter echoed across the room. I turned and saw Olivia posing for photographs with her bridesmaids. She looked radiant, confident, entirely at ease. Whatever was happening today was not troubling her at all. That realization bothered me more than the note itself. If she had been embarrassed by the situation, I could have forgiven it as thoughtlessness. But she seemed comfortable, almost pleased. A server stopped beside me and offered a tray of appetizers. I thanked him and took one, though I had little appetite. As I reached for my napkin, I noticed two women seated at a nearby table whispering. One leaned closer to the other and quietly pointed toward me. The second woman looked surprised. Then both glanced away when they realized I had noticed. Again, the same pattern. Sympathy, discomfort, pity. It was becoming impossible to ignore. Whatever story people had been told about me, it was spreading through the reception. I stared toward the head table where Olivia would soon sit with her new husband. Then my eyes drifted toward the large display near the dance floor. It contained dozens of framed family photographs arranged on decorative shelves. Smiling childhood pictures, graduation photos, holiday memories, generations of family history displayed for guests to admire. I stood slowly and walked over to look more closely. My heart sank the moment I arrived. There were pictures of Olivia as a baby, pictures of Daniel, pictures of Vanessa, pictures of distant cousins I barely recognized. Yet among dozens and dozens of photographs, there was not a single picture of me. Not one. It was as though I had never existed at all. For several seconds, I simply stood there in front of the display, studying every photograph one by one. I wanted to believe I had overlooked something. Perhaps my picture was hidden behind another frame. Perhaps there was a second display somewhere else in the ballroom. But the longer I looked, the clearer the truth became. I had been removed. Not forgotten. Not accidentally excluded. Removed. The difference mattered. Forgetfulness is careless. Removal requires intention. I felt a tightness in my chest, but I refused to let it show. Instead, I leaned slightly closer to one of the photographs. It showed Olivia at 16, smiling proudly beside a used sedan she had received for her birthday. Looking at that picture brought back a memory so vivid I could almost hear her voice again. She had cried when she first saw that car. Not because it was expensive. It was not. It had nearly 80,000 miles on it, and a dent near the rear bumper. But she loved it because it represented freedom. What nobody in this room knew was that I had paid for it. Daniel had been struggling financially that year. Olivia never learned where the money came from because I asked him not to tell her. I wanted her to enjoy the gift without feeling obligated to me. That had always been my way. Quiet support. Quiet sacrifice. No applause required. My eyes moved to another photograph. Olivia in a college graduation gown. I remembered the tuition checks, the textbooks, the unexpected expenses that seemed to arrive every semester. Again, nobody here knew how often I had helped, and I had never felt the need to mention it. Family helps family. That was how I had been raised. Yet standing there now, surrounded by visual evidence of a family history that had somehow erased me. I began wondering whether silence had been a mistake. "Beautiful display, is it not?" a voice beside me asked. I turned and found an older woman smiling politely. It took me a moment to recognize her. Barbara Jenkins, a distant relative from Olivia's mother's side. We had met only a few times over the years. "Very beautiful," I replied. Barbara hesitated. Then her smile faded slightly. "I was surprised not to see any photographs of you." There it was. Confirmation. Someone else had noticed. "So was I," I said gently. Barbara looked uncomfortable. "I almost said something earlier, but I did not want to cause trouble on a wedding day." I nodded. Probably wise. She gave my arm a light squeeze before excusing herself. The exchange lasted less than a minute, yet it told me everything I needed to know. Other people were noticing the omissions. Other people were noticing the strange atmosphere surrounding me. I was not imagining any of it. As I returned toward my table, I passed a group of guests gathered near the dance floor. One conversation drifted clearly enough for me to hear a single sentence. I heard she was never around much. The speaker lowered her voice after that, but she did not need to continue. I understood immediately. A story was circulating. Somewhere along the way, people had been led to believe I was a distant grandmother, an uninvolved grandmother, perhaps even a neglectful one. Suddenly the name tag made more sense. The note made more sense. The missing photographs made more sense. They were all pieces of the same narrative. Someone wanted guests to believe I did not matter. Someone wanted to rewrite history. I reached my table and sat quietly once again. Across the ballroom, Olivia laughed at something one of her bridesmaids said. She looked carefree, confident, entirely comfortable in the version of reality being presented today. Then I noticed something else. Near the head table stood a young woman carrying a clipboard. She appeared to be reviewing schedules with members of the staff. For a brief second our eyes met. Her expression changed instantly. Not pity, not embarrassment, recognition, as though she knew something. Before I could stand, she quickly looked away and continued walking, but not before slipping a folded envelope onto the empty chair beside mine. I waited several seconds before touching the envelope. Whoever had left it clearly did not want attention. Around me, the ballroom continued humming with cheerful conversations, clinking glasses, and soft music, completely unaware that my focus had narrowed to a single cream-colored envelope resting on an empty chair. There was no name written on it. No seal. Nothing that explained why it had been placed beside me. I slipped it into my purse and remained seated until I was certain nobody was watching. Then I excused myself and walked toward a quiet hallway near the restrooms. The noise of the reception faded behind me. For the first time all evening, I was alone. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded packet of printed emails. At first I assumed they were vendor communications about flowers or catering. Then I saw Olivia's name. My stomach tightened. The first message had been sent 6 weeks before the wedding. The subject line read, "Guest seating adjustments." I began reading. The first few lines seemed harmless enough. Then I reached a sentence that made me stop breathing for a moment. "Please keep Grandma Margaret as far from the family tables as possible. She makes everything about herself." I stared at the words. Then I read them again. The sentence did not change. The second email was worse. "Do not include any photographs of her in the family display. Most guests do not even know who she is anyway." My hands remained steady, but only because decades of experience had taught me how to hide shock. Inside, however, something painful was unfolding. Not because strangers had insulted me. Because these words came from Olivia. The little girl whose nightmares I used to calm. The little girl whose birthday cakes I baked every year until she left for college. I turned to the next page. Several messages followed. Some were from vendors asking for clarification. Others came from members of the wedding planning team. One coordinator even questioned whether removing a close family member from the photo display was appropriate. Olivia's response appeared beneath it. "Trust me, nobody will miss her." I closed my eyes briefly. The hallway suddenly felt colder. A few feet away, a decorative window overlooked the lake outside. Sunlight shimmered across the water. Everything looked peaceful. Yet the papers in my hands told a very different story. Then I found the final page. Unlike the others, it was not an email. It was a screenshot from a group message. Several names appeared at the top. Olivia, Vanessa, 2 bridesmaids, 1 cousin. The conversation was casual, almost playful. That made it worse. One message read, Did you approve the name tag? Another replied, yes. Everyone will think it is hilarious. Then came Olivia's response. Perfect. Maybe she will finally understand she is not the center of the family anymore. I lowered the page slowly. For a long moment, I simply stood there looking out at the lake. I expected anger. Instead, I felt something quieter. Clarity. The strange looks. The missing photographs. The note beneath my plate. None of it had been random. It had all been carefully planned. Someone had spent weeks constructing a version of reality where I was insignificant. Yet the irony was almost painful. They were working so hard to erase me because they knew exactly how much of this family story included me. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. I quickly returned the documents to the envelope. The young woman with the clipboard appeared around the corner. Up close, she looked to be in her early 30s. Nervous. Determined. Mrs. Whitmore? She asked softly. I nodded. She glanced behind her to make sure nobody had followed. My name is Rachel. I am the wedding coordinator. Her voice trembled slightly. I am sorry for what they did to you. Then she took a breath and added words that changed everything. And that envelope is only a small part of what I found. Rachel looked over her shoulder once more before speaking. The hallway remained empty except for us. From inside the ballroom, I could still hear distant laughter and music drifting through the doors. It sounded like a completely different world. I should probably not be doing this, she said quietly. But after everything I saw, I could not stay silent. I studied her face. She seemed sincere. Nervous, but sincere. What exactly did you see? I asked. Rachel hesitated. Then she reached into her clipboard and removed several folded sheets of paper. When clients hire us, we keep records of all planning requests. Seating charts, vendor notes, event instructions. Most families are demanding. Some are difficult, but I have never seen anything like this. She handed me the papers. The first document contained a list of special instructions for staff members. At first glance, they appeared ordinary. Then I noticed my name. Next to it were several bullet points. Do not seat near bridal party. Do not include in family. Introductions. Avoid placing in official photographs. My eyes moved slowly across the page. Every instruction seemed designed to accomplish one goal. Isolation. Rachel pointed toward a section highlighted in yellow. This part bothered me the most. I read the sentence twice. If Margaret asks about family photos, tell her the display was finalized months ago. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the kind of calm that arrives when confusion finally disappears. For hours I had been trying to understand what was happening. Now I understood. The humiliation had not been spontaneous. It had been organized, planned, reviewed, approved. Rachel lowered her voice even further. There is more. She handed me another page. This one contained notes from a planning meeting held 3 weeks earlier. Several comments were attributed directly to Olivia. One line stood out immediately. Guests need to see who actually supported me through life. I almost laughed at the irony. Supported her through life. I remembered helping pay for her first apartment after college. I remembered wiring money when her car broke down during her senior year. I remembered covering medical bills after an unexpected emergency. None of those moments had ever felt like sacrifices at the time. I loved my granddaughter. Helping her had felt natural. Yet reading those words now made me realize something painful. Somewhere along the way, generosity had become invisibility. Rachel watched me carefully. You are handling this better than most people would. Am I? I asked softly. She nodded. Most people would be furious. I folded the papers neatly. Anger rarely improves the truth. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Rachel surprised me again. Mrs. Whitmore, may I ask you something? Of course. Did you really have no role in Olivia's life? The question might have sounded insulting from someone else. From Rachel, it sounded genuine. Curious. I smiled sadly. I practically helped raise her. Rachel exhaled slowly as though a final piece of a puzzle had fallen into place. That is what I suspected. She looked down at her clipboard. Several staff members were confused. The way people talked about you did not match the way they reacted whenever your name came up. It felt like they were working very hard to convince everyone that you did not matter. Her words lingered in the air. Working very hard. She was right. Nobody spends weeks erasing someone who is unimportant. Erasure itself is proof of significance. A voice suddenly echoed from the ballroom. Guests were being invited to take their seats for dinner. Rachel straightened immediately. Professional instincts returned. I need to get back. She paused before leaving. One more thing. She handed me a small folded note. Someone else wanted you to have this. They were afraid to give it to you directly. Before I could ask who, she disappeared down the hallway. I stood alone once more and unfolded the note. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The message contained only a single sentence. Check the family group chat after the speeches begin. I stared at the words. Family group chat. A group chat I had apparently never been invited to. Slowly, I folded the note and slipped it into my purse beside the other documents. Then I walked back toward the ballroom. For the first time all evening, I was no longer wondering whether something was wrong. I knew something was wrong. The only question left was how much more I had not yet discovered. The reception dinner began a few minutes later. Guests settled into their seats while servers moved gracefully between tables carrying plates of food. From a distance, everything appeared flawless. The bride smiled. The groom smiled. Family members laughed and exchanged stories. Anyone walking into the ballroom at that moment would have believed they were witnessing a perfect celebration. I returned to my assigned seat and quietly placed my purse on the empty chair beside me. Inside were the emails, the notes, and questions that seemed to multiply with every passing hour. Across the room, Olivia sat at the head table surrounded by people who appeared completely comfortable with the version of events being presented tonight. I watched her laugh at something one of her bridesmaids said. There was no sign of guilt, no sign of uncertainty. If anything, she seemed relieved, as though a long-planned performance was finally unfolding exactly as intended. During dinner, I noticed something else. My phone remained unusually silent. Normally, family events generated endless messages, photographs, directions, last-minute updates. Yet all evening I had received nothing. Then I remembered the handwritten note Rachel had given me. Check the family group chat after the speeches begin. The words returned to me with surprising clarity. A group chat I had never been included in. A conversation taking place without me. I waited patiently. Years ago, I might have confronted someone immediately. Age teaches different lessons. Sometimes the truth arrives more completely when you stop chasing it. Eventually, the dinner plates were cleared away and the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. He welcomed everyone and announced the beginning of the speeches. Applause filled the room. As attention shifted toward the stage, I quietly removed my phone from my purse. My son Daniel had once helped me set up family sharing on my tablet. During the process, several accounts remained linked across devices. Most of the time I forgot they even existed. Tonight, for the first time, I wondered whether those old connections still worked. My fingers moved carefully across the screen. Within moments, I found it. A group conversation carrying a simple title. Family Wedding Team. More than 200 messages appeared. My heart began beating faster. I opened the thread and started scrolling. At first, the discussion focused on flowers, transportation, and guest arrivals. Then the tone changed. Gradually, subtly, a joke here, a sarcastic comment there. My name appeared repeatedly. Make sure Grandma does not start one of her stories. Keep her busy during photos. Do not let her sit near Olivia. Each message carried the same underlying message. Exclusion, dismissal, erasure. Then I reached a conversation from 2 weeks earlier. Several family members participated. One cousin asked whether the name tag idea might be too harsh. Olivia responded almost immediately. Relax. She will not even realize everyone is laughing at her. I stared at the sentence. Not because it hurt, because it revealed something important. Olivia was not acting out of anger. She was acting out of certainty. She genuinely believed nobody would challenge her. She genuinely believed the entire family agreed. I continued scrolling. Then I found a message from Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. After tonight, she will finally understand her place. I lowered the phone slowly. That sentence hurt more than all the others combined. Vanessa had been part of our family for nearly 15 years. I had celebrated her promotions, helped during difficult times, welcomed her into every holiday gathering. Yet there it was, written plainly for everyone to see. Her place. As though I were an inconvenience to be managed rather than a member of the family. Around me, applause erupted as one of the speeches concluded. Guests smiled and raised their glasses. Nobody noticed the quiet storm unfolding at my table. Then my phone vibrated unexpectedly. A new message appeared from an unknown number. There was no greeting, no explanation, only a photograph. I opened it. The image showed a legal document resting on a desk. I recognized the signature immediately. It belonged to my late husband, Richard. Beneath the photograph were 7 words that made me sit perfectly still. Your granddaughter does not know this exists. For several seconds, I could not take my eyes off the photograph. The image was slightly blurry, as though it had been taken quickly, but the signature was unmistakable. Richard Whitmore. My husband. The man who had spent 42 years building a life beside me. The man who believed that promises mattered. I enlarged the photograph and studied the document more carefully. Most of the text was impossible to read, but one phrase stood out clearly near the bottom. Family Trust Amendment. My pulse quickened. Richard had established a family trust years before his passing. At the time, he insisted it was simply responsible planning. He wanted future generations protected. He wanted stability long after we were gone. We reviewed the paperwork together, signed the necessary documents, and eventually placed it out of mind. Yet now, staring at that photograph, I realized there had been changes I never knew about. Another message arrived before I could respond. Check your email. That was all it said. No name. No explanation. I opened my email account and immediately noticed a new message waiting in my inbox. The sender's address looked familiar. My breath caught when I recognized it. Martin Keller, Richard's attorney. We had not spoken in nearly 8 months. The subject line read, if necessary. Slowly, I opened the message. Attached was a scanned document accompanied by a short note. Margaret, if you are receiving this, circumstances have likely made this information relevant. Richard instructed me to keep this amendment confidential unless specific concerns arose regarding respect, integrity, and treatment within the family. My eyes moved to the attachment. The amendment was authentic. Signed. Witnessed. Legally filed. Richard had added a clause to the family trust less than 6 months before his death. I began reading carefully. The language was formal, but the meaning became clear very quickly. Any beneficiary who intentionally humiliated, exploited, or knowingly attempted to isolate another direct family member for personal gain could lose access to distributions from the trust. I read the paragraph twice. Then a third time. The room around me seemed to fade away. The speeches continued somewhere in the background. Glasses clinked. Guests laughed. Yet all I could hear was Richard's voice from years ago. Character always reveals itself eventually, Maggie. He used to say that whenever we face disappointment, character always reveals itself eventually. Apparently, he had believed it strongly enough to write it into legal documents. I closed my eyes briefly. Suddenly, several pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Olivia's confidence. Vanessa's comments. The certainty displayed throughout the group chat. None of them knew this amendment existed. They believed the trust would eventually pass according to the original structure. They believed their behavior carried no consequences. Another memory surfaced unexpectedly. About 2 years before Richard passed away, Olivia had visited our home for dinner. After she left, Richard remained unusually quiet. When I asked what was wrong, he simply said, I hope she learns the difference between gratitude and entitlement. At the time, I assumed he was overreacting to some careless remark. Now I wondered whether he had noticed warning signs long before I did. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Martin Keller appeared. I am attending the reception tonight at Richard's request. He arranged that possibility years ago. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Attending the reception? I looked around the ballroom instinctively. Near the back of the room, standing beside one of the side entrances, was a familiar figure in a charcoal suit. Older now, more gray hair, but unmistakably Martin. He gave a small nod in my direction. Nothing dramatic, just acknowledgement. Then he returned his attention to the stage. The realization settled over me slowly. I was not alone. For hours I had felt surrounded by people determined to rewrite history. Yet now I possessed the emails, the group messages, the planning documents, and something far more powerful than any of those. The truth. Across the ballroom, Olivia stood to deliver her speech. Guests applauded warmly as she approached the microphone. She smiled with complete confidence, complete certainty. Watching her, I suddenly understood something she did not. Tonight was not unfolding according to her plan anymore. Olivia smiled as she stepped up to the microphone. The room immediately quieted. Every guest turned toward the head table, waiting to hear the bride speak. She looked confident, elegant, completely in control of the evening. For a moment, I studied her face and tried to find traces of the little girl I once knew. The child who used to run through my backyard chasing fireflies during summer evenings. The teenager who called me whenever she was disappointed or afraid. But standing there now was someone different. Someone who had spent weeks constructing a story that left no place for me. "Thank you all for being here," she began warmly. The audience responded with smiles and nods. Her speech was polished, thoughtful. She thanked friends, co-workers, vendors, and distant relatives. She thanked her parents for supporting her dreams. She thanked her new husband for believing in her. Then she paused dramatically and looked around the ballroom. I would not be standing here today without the people who truly showed up for me throughout my life. The phrase caught my attention immediately. Truly showed up for me. Several guests applauded. Olivia continued speaking about loyalty, sacrifice, and family. The irony was so overwhelming that I almost smiled. While she spoke, my phone vibrated once more. Another message from Martin Keller appeared. The amendment is active immediately if you choose to invoke it. The decision remains yours. I read the message twice before locking my screen. The decision remains yours. That sentence stayed with me. Richard had not created the amendment as a weapon. He had created it as protection. Even now, years after his passing, he was still trying to shield the family from becoming something unrecognizable. Olivia finished her speech to enthusiastic applause. Guests rose to their feet. Cameras flashed. Glasses were raised. Then the master of ceremonies returned to the microphone. "Before we move on to the next toast," he announced, "we have time for one more family member who wishes to speak." My heart remained calm. I had not requested to speak. Yet almost immediately, dozens of eyes drifted toward me. Apparently someone else had. Daniel looked confused. Vanessa looked uneasy. Olivia's smile tightened slightly. The master of ceremonies glanced down at his notes. "Mrs. Margaret Whitmore?" Silence settled across the ballroom. I realized Rachel was standing near the sound booth. She met my eyes briefly and gave the smallest nod. The opportunity had been created deliberately. Slowly I stood. My chair moved softly across the floor. Hundreds of eyes followed me as I walked toward the microphone. Strangely, I felt no anger, no nervousness, only certainty. The ballroom looked different from the stage. Larger, brighter. I could see every table, every guest, every face. I adjusted the microphone slightly and allowed a moment of silence to pass. "Good evening," I said. My voice carried clearly through the room. "For those who do not know me, my name is Margaret Whitmore." Another pause followed. "Tonight has been a very interesting evening." A few nervous laughs drifted through the crowd. Olivia shifted in her seat. I continued calmly. Weddings are meant to celebrate beginnings. They are also moments when people reflect on the journey that brought them here. The room remained silent. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. I have spent most of my life believing that family is built through small acts. Time, patience, sacrifice, quiet support when nobody else is watching. I glanced briefly toward Olivia. Those contributions do not always appear in photographs. Sometimes they are forgotten entirely. Several guests exchanged uncertain looks. The atmosphere had changed. The confidence I had seen earlier was beginning to disappear from certain faces. Then I reached into my purse and placed a small stack of printed papers on the podium. Emails, notes, messages, evidence. I did not need to reveal them yet. Their presence alone was enough. Across the ballroom, Martin Keller slowly stood from his chair and buttoned his jacket. And for the first time all night, Olivia no longer looked certain of anything. The ballroom remained completely silent. Nobody reached for a glass. Nobody whispered. Hundreds of eyes moved between me, the papers resting on the podium, and Martin Keller standing near the back of the room. Olivia sat frozen at the head table. Vanessa looked down at her lap. Daniel seemed unable to decide where to focus his attention. I rested one hand lightly on the stack of documents. "I have no interest in embarrassing anyone tonight," I said calmly. Contrary to what some people may believe, I did not come here looking for attention. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. In fact, I came here for the same reason everyone else did. To celebrate family. I allowed the words to settle before continuing. But throughout this evening, I learned something important. Not about myself. About the people around me. I picked up one of the printed emails and looked at it briefly. I learned that removing someone from photographs does not erase their contribution. I learned that changing a seating chart does not change history. And I learned that respect is much easier to talk about than it is to practice. Nobody interrupted. Nobody could. The truth has a strange effect on a room. It does not need to be loud. It simply occupies all available space. I set the paper back down. Many years ago, my husband Richard created a family trust. His goal was simple. He wanted future generations protected. He wanted success to be accompanied by character. At the mention of Richard's name, several older relatives nodded. They remembered him well. What most people did not know, I continued, is that he later added an amendment. Across the ballroom, Martin began walking slowly toward the stage. Each step seemed to deepen the silence. Olivia's expression changed visibly. Confidence gave way to concern. Concern gave way to uncertainty. Martin stopped beside the podium and handed me a single document. Then he addressed the room. Everything Mrs. Whitmore has said is accurate. His voice was professional and measured. The amendment exists. It has been legally binding for several years. Murmurs spread through the audience. Martin waited patiently before continuing. The amendment specifically addresses conduct involving deliberate humiliation, exclusion, manipulation, or mistreatment of direct family members. The murmurs immediately stopped. Olivia stared at him. Daniel looked as though someone had removed the floor beneath him. I glanced toward my granddaughter. For the first time all evening, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, fear of consequences. Martin opened the document and read a short passage aloud. The language was formal, but the meaning was unmistakable. Beneficiaries who engaged in such behavior could lose access to future distributions from the trust. Complete silence returned. I could hear the air conditioning system humming softly overhead. Nothing else. Then something unexpected happened. I felt sorry for Olivia. Not because she had been exposed. Because she had mistaken control for strength. She had spent weeks trying to convince people I did not matter. Yet all she had really revealed was her own character. I looked directly at her. Olivia, I loved you before this wedding, and I will still love you tomorrow. Tears appeared in her eyes immediately. But love does not excuse behavior. It never has. She lowered her head. Nobody rushed to defend her. Nobody argued. The evidence spoke for itself. I gathered the documents into a neat stack and handed them back to Martin. Then I stepped away from the microphone. The decision regarding the trust will be handled properly through legal channels, Martin announced. Not tonight. Relief visibly spread through parts of the room. The wedding would not become a courtroom. There would be no public punishment. No dramatic confrontation. Just accountability. Quiet and unavoidable. I picked up my purse and walked toward the exit. As I passed the family photo display, I stopped briefly. The empty space where my photographs should have been no longer bothered me. People can remove pictures from frames. They cannot remove truth from memory. Outside, the evening air felt cool against my skin. The lake reflected the lights from the ballroom behind me. Somewhere inside, the celebration continued, though differently now. I stood there for a moment and looked across the water. Richard had been right. Character always reveals itself eventually. And for the first time in a very long while, I felt completely at peace. As I walked toward my car, I realized something that made me smile. Tonight, they had tried to make me disappear. Instead, they had finally shown everyone exactly who they were.